We are joined today by Mr. Girija Pande. Mr. Pande is Chairman for Asia Pacific for Tata Consulting Services, India's largest IT services company. Welcome, Mr. Pande, to INSEAD.
Thank you, Anil.
This is a free-flowing conversation about the IT industry, about Asia, about Tata Consulting Services. As the chairman for Asia Pacific business, you of course are looking closely at the economies here in Asia. The three largest economies being Japan, China, and India. How would you compare and contrast the IT services industries in these three markets?
So if you look at Japan, clearly it's one of the largest IT markets, or second only to the US. So it's a huge market. There are two big players, Hitachi and Fujitsu, and then there are lots of small ones. Japan doesn't have a very innovative models for IT services. It's more a hardware, embedded systems driven economy. So IT services are take the back seat, so they haven't done that well in the IT services market. China, India are different stories. India has a largely export oriented model of IT services. So if the Indian domestic market is around $16-17 billion, the IT exports are around nearly now $50 billion. And China is the other way around because they are a domestic focused and growing fast IT services market. So around $20 to $25 billion IT services market, of which exports are around about $4 or $5 billion. So it's a domestic market. India is an export oriented market. But in both those economies, the IT services market is booming. In both the economies, there are lots of players. China is a fragmented market with lots of small players. India has some more major global companies. So that's the difference, but both are growing very fast. China faster than India.
Now, if you look at, say, the China market, the multinational companies, Western multinationals, if you will, whether it's Walmart or ABB and Nokia and companies like that, that for the China market, that when they are looking for IT service providers, how do they look at, should they go to the IBMs and Accentures, the Western multinationals? Should they go to companies like Tata Consulting Services, which obviously operates in India? Should they go to domestic Chinese companies? How does that equation play out, and what are the different strengths and weaknesses that different players
the three
play?
names you mentioned, we work with them in China. That's by the by. But the way what we see in China, the way it's panning out is that the multinationals have used Indian businesses, Indian IT companies, especially the top ones, quite well.
That's right.
I mean, we've been around for 40 years.
So that's why when they go to China,
so they understand us. What they want to know is whether we are in China, have we got the capability to manage their business in China? Because they know our capability in India and the rest of the world, but they want to know whether we have the skills and the scale and the capabilities which, say, an IBM would have in China or an Accenture would have in China. So that's the only thing that they look for. Name-wise, they are very comfortable because they already work with us. And as I said to you, all the names you mentioned already work with us in China.
Right. Now, and would it be correct to say that because of language differences between China and India, that to serve, let's say, one of your global customers in China, the capabilities have to be built locally?
Well, that goes without saying. I mean, 94% of our 1,100 staff in China are Chinese, led by a Chinese head of the unit. Right. So that goes without saying. The language also plays in China's advantage in the following. When we do a global rollout of a large multinational, there are Asian languages to be covered. So Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, Japanese, Thai, Bahasa are easily available and can be offshored to China. They can't be offshore to India. So what we do effectively is that the English language countries get offshore to India in the low-cost centers, and these languages get offshore to China. So China has a very important role when we globally roll out for multinationals who are operating across all these countries.
So that China, for Tata Consulting, that your Chinese operations are not just for China, but also for actually the Asian languages that you just mentioned?
Well, China for us is, as we call it, part of the global delivery model. So China, India centers, we have 5 in China, 5 centers in China, in India centers, and Brazil. These are considered our global centers of delivery because they have both skill and scale, all these 3 countries. Brazil to a lower extent, but certainly India and China. So we do 2 kinds of business in China. One is China for China, and the other is China, where we are offshoring from the West or the region into China.
As you look at the China market, in terms of competition, the long term, 5 years, 10 years, who do you see as the big competitors in China? Would it be the multinationals? Would it be the Indian companies? Would it be Chinese companies? Would it be all of them?
I will be all of them. It's not that every company will survive. Chinese market is very fragmented at the moment. So if you take the largest Chinese company today in IT services called Neosoft, Neosoft will have anywhere between 18 to 20,000 people today. Now that's small. I mean, our intake this year will be 30,000.
That's right.
Out of 160,000. So they are yet not come to scale, but they are. They are consolidating and they will also come to scale. I have no doubt on that. So there is a fragmented market which will consolidate on one side, and then some of the Indian players will become bigger in China as we grow in China. The multinationals will stay. Some will probably go away if they don't find scale or value. But of course, likes of IBM and HP will be there. So we will have these 3 segments, but in a slightly different form. Bigger Chinese companies, bigger Indian companies, and of course these multinationals who are there.
Do you think that in 5 years, say 5-7 years, consolidation could happen rapidly enough in China that one of the companies could emerge with, say, 100,000 people?
Yes, it could happen. There is no doubt that they are also looking at the same model as India has done. We have, of course, grown organically to this level.
Yeah.
We have not merged and grown to these levels. They might just, some of them might just be in a hurry to come to those levels.
Although I guess, growth through consolidation is probably a bit harder because then you have the challenge of integration as compared to organic.
The large Indian companies, IT companies have grown through organic route. We are used to recruiting high number of people, training them, the learning and development, putting them through the paces and putting them through the system. They will also have to learn that.
The other thing, you talked about that TCS, that, globally has about 140,000 people.
160,000 people.
160,000 people, and you'll be adding 30,000 this year. So essentially, you're talking about a 20% growth. Now, if we're to just do a linear projection and say 20% growth for the next 6 years, essentially that means becoming roughly 4 times of the current number. So that one could imagine if TCS were to continue to grow at 20% a year, that by 2020 you could have 1 million professionals.
We are asked this question many times, and there is a story we say. In our strategy, we also worry about how are you going to house 1 million people?
Exactly, right.
So we have a very
people?
clear strategy of where do we get into non-linear growth models. And there are many ways of doing it. Creating IPRs, which we have done in the banking field and financial sectors. Creating IT as a service model. So there are lots of non-linear models available to us. And in fact, one of our key strategies is how to have non-linear growth, which means you don't grow so much of billing and so many people. And that is the model that we are actually progressing.
Talking about 1 million people, that one can imagine companies like, say, the Walmart or Indian Railways, having millions of people. But much harder to imagine an IT services company with engineers, like having 1 million engineers. And we're not talking 50 years from now. We're talking maybe 10 years from now.
It is an issue. I think we will grow, but non-linear models will probably come in. We see cloud as computing as a major issue. We see software as a service. We see creating IPRs and license revenues rather than just service revenues. So there are lots of opportunities available today in the new world where we could grow revenues by non-linear models. And that's what I think is going to be one of our priorities.
To look at another side of TCS evolution, that like the typical large successful Indian IT services company, my sense is that TCS early evolution, of course, TCS has already been around for a few decades, that TCS early evolution was primarily, let's say, global delivery centers in India and the markets, customers in the English-speaking countries. But in recent years, particularly in this decade and going forward, it looks like that TCS, in terms of its own global footprint, is changing, both in terms of the geographies where the company gets its revenues and the geographies where it has its capabilities. And so what kinds of, let's say, what are some of the toughest challenges that the company faces as it goes through this evolutionary process, maybe from globalization 1.0 to globalization 2.0, becoming really much more of a truly global company?
I think if you see the first phase, we went through, as you rightly said, so we had a global footprint. Then we enlarged the global footprint. Then we got listed in 2004, so we got global capital. Then we started acquiring companies, hiring people, and we started getting talent. So global talent. So global footprint, global capital, global talent. And I think these are the three things that you need if you want to call yourself a global, truly global company. The challenges ahead, so I think we have started this journey. The challenges ahead clearly are when you acquire talent and integrate global talent into your company, especially at senior management levels. How do we provide them the motivations that they are in a global company and not in a large Indian company, which is in many parts of the world? I mean, this is the challenge. Now, the good news for us is that the Tata Group itself is globalizing. 2/3 of Tata Group's $60 billion income comes now, revenue comes from outside. Right? Maybe through acquisitions, maybe through growth. So we have a parent group which is already globalizing. TCS is one of the most global within that. So we have that advantage, and we are moving towards, very clearly moving towards being a global name. We are, if you look at our rankings, we are sort of 8th in terms of revenue, 5th in terms of market capitalization globally, 4th in terms of number of people. So we are already in the global ranking. But we've got to build a brand which is global. That's the challenge. And building people who are truly global. Of all nationalities. At this point in time, we have over 70 nationalities in TCS. But they are only 10% of TCS. Non-Indians. We want to increase this number.
What about the top management? That if you look at the top, let's say, 50 people in TCS, how would the nationality distribution be?
Very few non-Indians, but they have started coming in. Very few non-Indians, but we have started consciously making that effort. And that's the challenge, to grow that. And I believe that India is well positioned to handle diversity because by very nature India is diverse. We grow up in diversity. We use an international global language. Our practices are international because of our colonial past. So an Indian company probably would not find it as difficult to globalize as maybe a Japanese or a Korean company 20 years ago. So that's the way we are looking at it.
If you look at the Tata Group, you said the Tata Group is a very globalized company, and the Tata Group has had a history of having senior positions, including corporate CEO level positions or CEOs of individual companies, be actually non-Indian.
Yes, I mean, Tata Motors have just announced the hiring a person from senior person of General Motors as head of the Tata Motors.
Going back to China for the moment, and that TCS, it's probably accurate to say, or Tata Group probably has the biggest presence of any Indian company in China.
Yes, by far. We have made big bets.
That's right, exactly. Both through its own organic investments, but as well as through acquisitions
Yes.
like the Jaguar Land Rover, Nat Steel, and the like. So if you look at Tata Consulting Services, that how would you, let's say, look at the evolution so far of TCS strategy in China?
Our strategy in China was quite clear. Number one, it was based on long term and build. So we started in 2002 and we started building from scratch. I have strongly believed that you don't acquire if you don't know the business yourself. Many people, go into a market and start acquiring. And I just have a feeling that in a country like China, you first need to learn yourself how it works. And we took the first few years to build a team, hire people from universities, hire good professionals, put the processes there, all our delivery for which we are known for, and go to our multinational customers. So we started with China for multinational customers, on which we built our base. Then we said China for regional customers. So the Japan offshoring, the Korean offshoring, the Hong Kong, Taiwan. Only after that did we go for the domestic market, because the domestic market is the most difficult market.
So that the regional customers was still TCS organic.
That's right.
Okay.
Then we went for the domestic market, where we got the domestic customers, that to the banks and the financial institutions, because we are very big in that.
Was that through the joint venture that?
Then we, at around 2005-06, the Chinese government approached us. The main arm of the Chinese government, National Development Reforms Commission, which is like the strategic planning unit, and said, you have been pioneers globally, because we set up the Indian IT industry in 1968. And you have come here as a pioneer. We would like to partner with you as a minority partner to set up an entity which can be set up the role model for the Chinese offshore IT industry. And we also brought in Microsoft, again a minority partner, because Microsoft had some experience in China on the offshoring side. So it's a three-way joint venture where TCS is a 70% shareholder and the other two are minority partners, including the government.
So actually you did not partner with a Chinese company. You actually set up a brand new joint venture with NDRC and Microsoft.
We like setting up our own cultures right from scratch. And of course the government was very keen. So the Chinese Prime Minister visited us in Bangalore. And that's where he made that famous statement that Chinese strength on hardware and Indian strength on software can change the world. That was in TCS Bangalore.
That's when Prime Minister Wen
Jiabao was there.
Made that statement.
That's right.
I see. Do you see examples of this kind of companies leveraging this kind of a synergy, Chinese hardware and Indian software?
We can see that. If you see Huawei, Huawei is very good in telecom equipment, as you know. And we work with them when they implement some of their solutions globally. And same thing with Lenovo. So both are in each other's countries. Both are growing. Both see each other's value.
And is TCS doing anything on the hardware front?
No.
No. It's pure services.
Pure services and software. We are creating a lot of software around specific verticals. So we are in the top 3 player in the core banking systems market. We acquired a company in Australia.
As products?
Products. We are the top 3 player in core banking, and in China for the last 3 years we've been ranked number 1 in core banking by IDC till this year. So last 3 years we've had a number 1 ranking. We have 4 core banking
in market share?
Core banking systems.
I see.
So we have 4 banks who are running core banking systems in China. So China, our focus has been on banks.
And that's a product you acquired?
We acquired that product, built on it, and we have now made it global. And it is a global challenger.
And is that product developed in India?
It started off in Australia,
I see.
part of FNS, and then we brought it, and we have now changed the technology. It is what we call the service-oriented architecture. It's the latest technology. We have added features and functionalities to it, and it runs about 125 banks around the world.
Very interesting.
Including 2 of the largest transaction-oriented banks, State Bank of India with 125 million deposit accounts and Bank of China with 380 million deposit accounts. Now run bank software. We call this banks software.
So in terms of the number of people that TCS has outside India, where would China rank today?
China is still small. 1,100 is still small.
Which would be the biggest outside India right now?
US is 14,000 people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
US is our biggest market. 50% of our market is the US.
So it may still be another 10 years
Yes.
by the time China
Yes.
becomes, let's say, the
Yes.
second largest.
Yes, yes. It'll take time.
It'll take time.
Take time.
Thank you very much for visiting INSEAD.
Thank you.
Yeah.